Okie dokie.
And where are we starting? Did you say?
Say again, Kathy?
Where are we
I
starting?
said, where are we starting?
So we are in Acts chapter 5 at verse 12. We're going to go back over that little section.
Okay. Okay. I got you.
So, and before we do that, I promised you that I would look into the whole little scene that we had before this with Ananias and Sapphira, and about them just, dropping dead when they lied. I have not had a chance to do that yet, but I will get you an answer about that next week. Also, we talked a little bit about the community life and stuff that the disciples had, and I was going to try to find out more about that and get back to you on that, and I'll do that next week as well.
I won't be here next week.
Luckily for you, it will be recorded. So,
Okay.
and it's possible I'll be here next week.
Yeah, I will. I'll be going to the beach. That's where I'll be. So.
Okay. So, 12 through 16. Now many signs and wonders were done among the people through the apostles, and they were all together in Solomon's portico. None of the rest dared to join them, but the people held them in high esteem. Yet more than ever believers were added to the Lord, great numbers of both men and women, so that they even carried out the sick into the streets and laid them on cots and mats in order that Peter's shadow might fall on some of them as he came by. A great number of people would also gather from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing the sick and those tormented by unclean spirits, and they were all cured. What's something that stands out there to you?
They felt that Peter's shadow would, just being in his shadow, would have the same healing effects as if he touched them. Very much like touching Christ's garment. Right.
So just like touching the fringe of Jesus's cloak, the shadow of Peter was powerful enough in the spirit to bring healing to people and even exorcise demons, which can be the same thing. We do well to remember that in the Bible, a lot of times what is characterized as an unclean spirit is not necessarily demonic. It does sometimes say it is, but a lot of times it's like a mental illness or something like that, something they didn't understand and thus classified as a spirit. The times when it is demonic is when the spirit responds to Jesus and fights back. Then that is a demonic spirit. So we have Peter who's walking through, and his shadow is healing people. And we need to remember that this isn't Peter doing this, right? This is the Holy Spirit acting through Peter, because Peter never had the ability to heal or to exorcise demons until the day that Jesus gave them that ability, when he sent them out on their missionary journey way back in the Gospels, right? Remember when he sent them out 2 by 2 and told them to take nothing with them and depend on the charity of others? So that's when they were given authority over the spirits and given the ability to heal, which is a spiritual power, a power from the Spirit. Okay. So, and this is bringing a little bit of Lutheran theology into this, because let me start this way. So, Barbara, I know you were raised Baptist, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Judy, you were Catholic, correct? Okay. Bonnie, you were Methodist, right? Rosie, you were Pentecostal holiness, not by choice, but by imprisonment. Can't move my mouse on. Debbie, what were you?
Lutheran.
Okay, so you were always Lutheran.
I went to the Catholic Church, but I really grew up Lutheran.
Okay. Elizabeth was raised Catholic. Kathy, were you raised Lutheran or Methodist? You're muted. There you go.
Methodist.
Okay. So I was a cradle Lutheran. My mom was United Methodist, but my dad was Lutheran. And so when they settled on a church, they actually looked at both UMC churches and Lutheran churches. And they settled on Incarnation in Columbia because they visited like 8 churches split between Lutheran and Methodist. And the reason they picked Incarnation was because the pastor there got their contact information, and the following Monday gave him a call and asked if he could visit them and sit down and talk about what they might need in their search for a church and how he could help. And it was because of that that they chose that church.
Dad was Methodist. I wish I'd gone that way.
So yeah, Rosie's dad was Methodist. Her mom was
Whatever she felt like at the time.
multi-denominational. So we all come from different backgrounds, right? And not all of us have been through like Lutheran catechesis, which is why we did that study on the small catechism a couple years ago, and probably need to do something to update that study again, because it's helpful to hear it again. One of the central tenets of Lutheran theology is that we cannot, by our own power, turn away from sin and become whole. Okay? Given the opportunity, because we do have free will, we have freedom of, as Luther said in the freedom of a Christian, we have the ability to turn away from holiness. But sin keeps us from ever turning towards holiness on our own. Okay? You can't on your own decide that you just want to be religious and want to be faithful and all of that. You need both the external word, which is the proclamation of the gospel, hearing people talk about the goodness of Jesus and what that has done in their lives. And you need God working in your heart, just like we heard last Sunday in John's text, and God bringing you to Jesus, because all scripture points to Jesus, and through Jesus you were saved. Okay, so Peter on his own could never have come to Jesus, right? Peter was chosen by Jesus as a disciple. Okay, he learned from Jesus. He then takes over a leadership role when the Holy Spirit descends on him at Pentecost, as we read earlier in Acts, and he begins to act into that role. And the more he acts into that role through the power of the Spirit, the greater his faith becomes, the more he believes, the more he understands, and the greater the power of the Spirit is in him. And so when he's walking through the streets and he's healing these people, he's not of his own accord healing these people. This is the Spirit working through him and showing the gifts of God's salvation. Does that make sense? Judy, you look kind of unsure.
No, that would apply to all the apostles that went out,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it applies even to us today, right?
Right.
The big dispute between Lutherans and Catholics for a long time was the doctrine of justification, right? What makes you saved? Okay. Lutherans said you cannot save yourself through good works. Your good works, though good, are not going to give you any merit with God. He's not writing it down and saying, okay, yeah, you were nice to that homeless person. That's a point in your favor. Okay. What we have always taught is that it is God's grace alone through Jesus that saves us. The good works that come from that, from being saved and knowing you're saved and being redeemed by God, the good things that you do flow from that. That is your heart overbursting with joy and letting it all out and sharing it with people. And so good works are important because it shows that you really have understood what Jesus has done for you. But good works in and of themselves cannot buy your salvation. There's nothing you can do that will equal what Jesus did for you on the cross, or repay what Jesus did for you on the cross. Okay? Whereas Catholic theology tends more towards both the grace of God and your cooperation with the grace of God. So you doing good works and showing that, and then those two things combined help you earn salvation. The ELCA, through the Lutheran World Federation, which we're a member of, it's a big global communion of Lutheran churches, signed a document about 10 years ago, maybe longer, called the Doctrine on the Justification of the Way, with the Catholic Church, kind of saying that we agree now on how justification works, but also saying that we disagree. So it's a very confusing document to read. You ever want to really get your head spun around, Google the justification or the doctrine of the justification of the way. It's a long read and it'll confuse you. So we did that because we're trying to improve our relationship with the Catholic Church. And the reason we're doing that is because it doesn't make sense for us as Christians, which should be our central identity, followers of Christ, to go out and look at other denominations and declare them to be apostate and say they're heretics and whatnot, when we're all supposed to be working for the same goal. Okay, it's fine to do it your own way. It's not fine to cut down on the way others are doing. Does that make sense? That's kind of unrelated to what we're talking about in scripture here, but it's it's an ongoing event right now, primarily because if you watch the news because you have no sense of self-care, you'll know that the potential Democratic nominee for vice president, Tim Walz, is an ELCA Lutheran. And that status has been drugged through conservative media, and we've been labeled some radical offshoot of Lutheranism, or Lutheran in name only. And I guess they forgot that we're also the biggest Lutheran denomination, so it would be rather difficult for us to be a radical offshoot, but that's neither here nor there. In any case, I just want to clarify the fact that we're not a radical church. We are definitely Lutheran. When I was ordained, I had to promise before the altar and before God that I would uphold the teachings of the Lutheran Church, the Book of Concord, which shows everything that we teach and includes the small catechism and the large catechism and all of that, and that I would uphold the three ecumenical creeds, which are the Apostles, the Nicene, and the Athanasian Creed. Okay, and so we are most definitely Lutheran, and we are not crazy. So if you hear that, just ignore it and let it go, because those people are trying desperately to divide the body of Christ rather than actually unite it. Okay, so let's get back to Acts and get off my soapbox. Judy, I can see you shaking your head.
Can you go back to your
Well,
edit?
No, I will leave that part in, because you'd be surprised how many office visits I've had over the last couple of weeks where I had to reassure people that yes, in fact, we are Lutheran. Yes, in fact, we do believe in a final judgment. And that we do
I
believe
had
in
not-
the Trinity. And
I haven't heard any of that, so.
yeah. So, and I don't mind those conversations. I don't mind reassuring people because that I want everybody to know that we are fully transparent in what we believe and that we do believe what we say we believe. Okay, so. Okay. So we talked about how Peter's shadow, is falling on people and they're being healed through the power of the Spirit. But one of the things that stands out to me is that they're doing this on Solomon's portico. And I mentioned this last week, last time, but I didn't get to talk about it all that much. So if you ever have a chance, I don't know if I can do it here or not. Let me see. Okay. Why is it on Pinterest? I don't want Pinterest. Okay, there we go. All right, let me see if I can get Zoom to share my screen real quick. Zoom. Get off of there. Okay.
There's,
All right, so you should be seeing on my screen, on your screen right now, a map of the Temple Mount. Okay. I'm gonna try to zoom in a little bit more so you can see it. Yep, nope, that's only that. Okay. So where my mouse is, if you can see the little mouse moving around.
yes,
All right, these are the walls of the temple right here. Okay. The temple sits just on the edge of the Temple Mount, which is one of the highest points in Jerusalem, and just to the side of the Kidron Valley. Okay. If this, in the first temple period, there was actually a walking bridge that went this way, because there was a special bridge to take the priests over to the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay. So where Jesus is arrested is over here on the mount, just across the Kidron Valley from Gethsemane, and then he's brought across to the temple. Okay. The place where they are preaching is right here, the royal portico. Okay. Also known as the portico of Solomon. So this is a place it's a covered place that has columns. Okay. So a colonnade. And in that place, it's just an open area. And so they're right there in just outside the inner court of the temple. This is a public area within the temple. Okay. This area right here would have been an area where people who were not actually Jews were actually allowed into the temple just to see it and to marvel at the wonder of the temple. Okay. They were allowed, it was called the Court of the Gentiles. But they were not allowed past this wall right here just in front of the royal portico or the portico of Solomon. Okay. Once you entered the inner court, you had to be a Jew, and to enter the farther area, the sanctuary, you had to be a man, because women were not allowed within that area of the temple. To enter the Holy of Holies here in the temple, you had to be the high priest, because that was where God dwelled. Okay. So they are standing right here in an area where you see there's no breaks in this wall right here. That's because to enter the inner court, you had to come around through the outer court, pass by the colonnade of Solomon, or come in through this gate here and pass through the colonnade of Solomon and come into the inner court. So they are preaching in an area where everybody's going to see them. Okay, they're not in like some random corner or some watchtower or like just outside the temple. They are challenging the temple authorities by coming in and preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ right there and saying, hey, you people who are going to offer your offerings to God, you are following according to the law, but Jesus has already fulfilled that law for you, and you need to hear about this saving grace. So come talk to us too. Okay? Does that make sense and give you maybe a little bit better sense of things?
Yes, it does.
Okay. All right. So that's a really bold step. Okay. Especially when you think about how earlier in Acts, Solomon's portico is where they were arrested for preaching after where Peter and John were arrested for preaching after they healed the man who was lame for 40 years, right? And so they have come back to the spot where they were arrested, even though the temple authorities tried them and released them. They've come right back and they're starting up again. And they're doing this on a daily basis. Let me get rid of my map here on my screen so I can see the text here. Okay. Now it says that, so now many signs and wonders were done among the people through the apostles. Okay. When we say the apostles, we're not talking about the other people who have come to know Jesus through their preaching. Okay. And I hesitate to say it that way because it sounds very open your heart and let Jesus in, which is not Lutheran theology. Okay. But have learned about Jesus from the apostles. We're talking about the 12. Okay. Which would be the 11 originals plus Matthias, who was selected to fill the position after Judas betrayed Jesus. Okay. And so the apostles here are willing to go to the portico of Solomon and preach. When it says none of the rest of them dared to join them, they're talking about the people who were believers and who were living in the community with the apostles. They were scared of going to do this, but the 12 were willing to go and risk everything to preach this gospel. Yet, even though they were scared to do that, they were still going out and telling people in areas other than the temple about Jesus. And they were doing works of wonder too through the Spirit, because the Spirit was moving through the entire community. And so it's not like they were sitting idly in their little community waiting to see if the apostles got arrested and whether they should run away. They were out doing missionary work too. They just weren't in the temple doing it. Okay. The work that they're doing is adding ever more believers to the Lord, great numbers of both men and women. All right. And that's another really important point, because in this day and age of what they were doing in the 1st century CE, okay, women were held in very low esteem, especially in Israelite society. Okay. This is one of the things that Jesus teaches against, because it had gotten to a point where you could divorce your wife if you wanted to, simply by giving her a certificate of divorce. You didn't need a reason. You didn't need to care for her. You didn't need to give her any money, nothing. You could just write down a certificate of divorce, hand it to her, and she was done. And she was considered damaged goods from that point on. Nobody would want to remarry her because they were taught that if they did, they were committing a sin. Women had no authority. That's why widows were in so much trouble in places, because they really could not on their own do what they needed to do. They had to depend on family members and others to help care for them and to help argue for them whenever they had an issue. Okay. That would be a major handicap in and of itself. Again, women could not enter into the temple proper because they were held in such low esteem. And if you look back at Leviticus, it gets even worse, where, you know, we've talked before about how a man shall not lie with a man passage. But just after that, the only thing it says about a woman is not that a woman shall not lie with another woman, because that would be an abomination. It says a woman shall not lie with an animal, because that would be an abomination. Because the only thing lower in the social status than a woman was an animal. Okay, that's where they were. And so for the first evangelist, the first people to see Jesus alive, to be the women who had followed him, okay, who were not numbered by the Bible as the 12, but were devoted, faithful apostles nonetheless. For them to be the first ones to see Jesus alive and to bring that news to the disciples would have been absolutely crazy to anybody reading this text in the ancient world. Okay? If you had important news delivered, you did not do it through the lips of a woman. But Jesus chooses to act in a different way. Jesus chose who to appear to. And so by doing that, he pointed out that women were important to this movement, that women would always be important to this movement. And so when it says here that men and women are being added to this, this is a break from ancient tradition, because normally you wouldn't number the women. You wouldn't talk about the women because they were considered appendages of their husbands. Remember, even in the feeding of the 5,000, in all four versions, it does not ever say anything about women. It says 5,000 men, which means there was probably a lot more people there when the feeding happened than just 5,000. Because there were definitely women there. There were definitely children there. There were definitely other people hanging around. All right. So this is a turning point that we should pay attention to, because it shows that women are going to have an important place in the distribution of the word, in sharing the gospel. We'll see that when we get into Paul's letters, even though the church has over the years tried to edit those. And there are places we'll talk about in Paul's letters where for centuries, the adopted text tried to change a woman's name into a man's name so that they could avoid the fact that a woman was preaching. We're going to talk about how that got fixed. Okay. But women have been an important part of the ministry since the very beginning. And this is a part of Acts that shows us that. And it will continue to go on. Some of the people who supported Jesus all through his ministry were women. Some of the people who support Paul and who assist Paul through things are women. Okay. Some of the people that Paul commissions to go and be overseers of churches are women. And that would have been absolutely nuts to the ancient world. So thoughts about that?
Well, that's more true in the Hebrew area than in some other cultures at that same time, right? I
Right.
mean, like in Greece, perhaps the women were treated more equally.
Yeah.
or whatever.
So it varies by culture. However, we'll see when we get to some of the disputed letters of Paul, like First and Second Timothy, especially Second Timothy tries to establish what's called a house code, okay, which is a Roman invention. And in the Roman house code, it is the Latin for it is paterfamilias, which means the father is the head of the family. Okay. And so in Roman culture, a house code would say the man is in charge, the woman is important, but the woman has specific duties she must do in order to stay in good esteem, or in relevant. I don't know the word I want to use. In order to be important in the relationship. And then children fall way down the list, and then you have servants and everything else. And so Second Timothy tries to adopt a Roman house code and implement it into Christianity, which is where some of our problems come from, like our LCMS brothers and sisters, the Missouri Synod, not letting women preach or have authority over others. And it's all silliness is what it is. And I'll die on that hill because it's ridiculous. If Jesus chose women to be the first apostles who saw him living, then women have the authority to preach and have authority over others, okay? Because Jesus said so. And I don't care what anybody says later. Jesus trumps everybody. Okay. But yes, it would vary by culture. And Christianity has to adapt itself, right? Because right now, the main culture they're taking on is their own. Okay, the Israelite society that is living under Roman occupation. If you've noticed, throughout these 5 chapters here, the Romans seem to have taken a convenient vacation from Jerusalem or something. Like there's no mention of the Roman guards. Pontius Pilate hasn't really been talked about. There's no like overlying threat of Roman invasion like you feel in the Gospels. And so it kind of makes you wonder, where are the Romans in all of this? Why aren't they having an issue? Because this is the same movement that they thought they had put down, right? They killed the leader of it. Why is it still happening? Don't worry, they'll be back. Okay. When we get further into Acts, you'll see the Romans haven't gone anywhere. They were just on holiday, I guess. As Christianity spreads, and Paul is the one who has to deal with this into the Greco-Roman world, he's going to encounter things that he has to figure out theologically how to deal with. You know, one of them is the fact that a lot of people who hear the gospel want to believe and want to be a part of the church, but are not willing to do things according to the law that Peter is pushing. Because Peter pushes the version of Christianity in which you should adhere to the law, yet also believe in Jesus, okay? Which is like the Jewish Christian version. Paul says, if you weren't a Jew in the first place, you are not under the law and never have been. And to place yourself under the law then negates the gospel of Jesus, because then you're responsible for keeping the law. So he's trying to find a workaround, because one of the main objections from men especially was grown men didn't want to volunteer to get circumcised in the ancient world. And I don't blame them. Okay, I'm not volunteering for any kind of surgery in the ancient world. Okay, because it doesn't sound like it's all that safe. So Paul has to deal with that. All right. As Christianity spreads up into the lands that are considered by the Romans to be barbaric, where the Goths and the Visigoths and all the Gallic people are, and then up to the Celtic lands and stuff, they find other practices that they have to try to accommodate. And so they end up adopting certain people within those cultures to be saints and ascribing different things to them. So, for instance, Saint Patrick is described as the one who chases all the snakes out of Ireland, which makes me want to live in Ireland. I got to tell you, you know, did he actually chase all the snakes out? Of course not. But they needed something to elevate him because he was somebody who was important to the Christian movement, right? And the snake, of course, had come at that time to represent the devil in the Genesis text, even though the Genesis text never actually says it. That was a long-winded explanation. Don't look at me like that. I get sidetracked. That's very nice. You want to show them?
Can you
I don't
guys
think
see
they
it?
can see you. Might want to turn your camera.
If you can see me, you can see this.
I drew it.
Very good.
I'm sure they didn't think I drew it. Elizabeth said I should frame it. Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right, so any other thoughts about this particular section or any questions from anything I said? Barbara, are you still with us?
Yes.
Okay. I just couldn't see you anymore. It looks like you're like laying down on the keyboard.
I think my head is on the keyboard.
You all right?
Yeah, I'm all right. I didn't sleep at all last night. I'm pretty tired.
Okay.
I've been having some pretty bad nights.
I
I'm
imagine
sleeping in
so.
the recliner, which I hate, but I can't handle myself in the bed, so
I imagine so, with broken bones and Tylenol.
yep. But it could have been a lot worse.
It could have been, and I was worried. I did not like that text message at all.
You weren't near as worried as I was. I don't think.
You say that, but you can ask Rosie. That text message jolted me right up and started me moving. So,
Well, Alan got up early the next morning, Saturday morning, and went to see if we could get past on the roads. Of course, it had rained. No, yeah, Saturday morning. I fell on Friday. And we went to the after hours at this orthopedic place, which was much better than going to the emergency room.
yeah.
In principle, they're an emergency room for their type of injuries, but it worked out a lot better. But he went down and made sure he could get down past the road. We have a creek we have to pass that floods, and it had covered the road, but he could get through. So he come back and got me. We went.
I'm glad y'all were able to go.
Well, we'd have just had to go later when it calmed down. Nothing to do but go.
All right. Any questions about this little section before we move on?
Yeah, I'm glad you went back over it.
Yeah. There's more to say, and I got cut off because of the phone call and everything. So I wanted to make sure that we talked about that a little bit. So, all right. So all right. So 517. We're gonna, as we talked about before, there's a pattern in Acts in which there is the disciples do some kind of great work, and they begin to proclaim Christ through the work and through their words. And then there is a reaction from the temple authorities or from the Roman authorities or from what John likes to call the Jews. and we've talked briefly about that. I meant to say something about it in the sermon this past Sunday, but if you noticed, the first 2 Sundays we were talking about the bread of life, the crowd was called the crowd. But then last Sunday, when they started to grumble against Jesus, the crowd suddenly became the Jews. And whenever John uses the term the Jews, he is almost invariably talking about people who've set themselves against Jesus, which means the crowd had turned against Jesus, which is why they were grumbling, and which was why they started fussing. And it's going to get worse as we get into this Sunday's part of the Bread of Life discourse. They get quite angry. So anytime in Acts we see the miracle and then we see the preaching, we're going to see a reaction from somebody in authority who does not like this. And then the disciples are going to be persecuted, and then they're going to be miraculously delivered, okay, because the church continues. So we're about to hit that persecution piece again. Let's see. Can somebody read 5:17 through 26?
I'll do it, Pastor.
Thank you, Debbie.
Then the high priest took action, he and all who were with him, that is the sect of the Sadducees,
Yep.
that hates, being filled with jealousy, arrested the apostles and put them in the public prison. But during the night, an angel of the Lord opened the prison doors, brought them out, and said, "Go stand in the temple and tell the people the whole message about this life." When they heard this, they entered the temple at daybreak and went on with the teaching. How far did you want me to go? Keep going?
Yeah, to 26.
Oh, okay. When the high priest and those with him arrived, they called together the council and the whole body of the elders of Israel, and sent to the prison to have them brought. But when the temple police went there, they did not find them in the prison, so they returned and reported, "We found the prison securely locked and the guards standing at the doors, but when we opened them, we found no one inside." Now, when the captain of the temple and the chief priests heard these words, they were perplexed about them, wondering what might be going on. Then someone arrived and announced, "Look, the men who you put in prison are standing in the temple and teaching the people." Then the captain went with the temple police and brought them, but without violence, for they were afraid of being stoned by the people.
Okay. So at the beginning there, we just have the Sadducees, right? The Sadducees are the high class of Israelite society, because the priesthood, and this requires a little bit of explaining, so it's going to take a second, so bear with me. Okay, if you remember back in the Exodus period, after the golden calf sin, when Moses was up on the mountain, God declares that the descendants of Aaron will be priests. Okay, he gives that gift to the tribe of Levi, which is the tribe that Aaron belongs to, that Moses also belongs to. Okay, so we call that the Levitical priesthood. All right, because it belongs to the tribe of Levi. However, not everybody in the tribe of Levi is a priest. The tribe of Levi is supposed to be the priestly tribe that produces the high priest through the direct descendants of Aaron. Okay, this gets a little shaky when you get to King David, because there was some issues with a descendant of Aaron named Eli, his 2 sons, one of them's Phineas and one of them something else. I can't remember. In any case, they betray God by violating the laws and taking the better portions of the sacrifices for themselves. And God decrees that the line of Eli from Aaron will cease. And that's exactly what happens. Okay. Eli's sons die in combat with the Philistines and lose the Ark of the Covenant. And when Eli finds out about it, he falls over at the temple dead. So then the high priesthood passes to another line from another portion of Aaron's descendants, and they go on to eventually become the Sadducees. Okay. There are Pharisees who are also descendants of Aaron and are priests. But the high priest will always come from the Sadducees sect at this point, because what's happened is the Levitical priesthood has split into different theological camps. The Sadducees believe only in the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, and they do not accept the prophets, mainly because they had a lot of problems with the prophets during the prophetic period. And they do not accept the idea of the resurrection. The Pharisees do, and they also are open to the teachings of the prophets, which is why you find the prophets being read in the different synagogues. The rest of the Levite tribe, who are not designated descendants of Aaron, but are part of the Levite tribe, they are responsible for doing duties in the temple and supporting the priesthood. So they are the captain of the guard and the policemen in the temple. They are the people who help with the sacrifices, but are not priests. Even at the beginning of Luke, Elizabeth's husband, what's his name?
Zechariah.
Yeah, Zechariah, sorry. Zechariah is not a priest, but Zechariah is a member of the tribe of Levi, and so he is there in the temple doing his duty to support the priest when he gets this message from God about the birth of John the Baptist. Okay. So the Sadducees are priests, just like the Pharisees can be, but the Sadducees have control of the high priesthood, and they are the elite of Israelite society, which is not what you want in priests or pastors. And don't worry, I'm not elite in any way, shape, or form. I can promise you. But they are the ones who have primarily collaborated with the Romans, because they see the Romans as a way to preserve their power. As long as they cooperate with the Romans, then the Romans will keep them in charge of what they want to be in charge of. Okay? So the Sadducees come together under the high priest, and this is going to include former high priest and the sons of them and all of that group. And they decide this can't keep going on. So they send the temple police and arrest the 12 apostles who were preaching in the temple. They send them to the prison, right? Not the temple prison, which there is one, for whatever reason, but to the public prison, which is run by the Romans. And in the night, an angel of the Lord comes and unlocks the doors, lets them out, tells them to go back to the temple and preach again. Then locks all the doors back, and the guards have no idea what happened. Okay. We see something similar happen later with Paul, where an earthquake breaks open the prison, but Paul and Silas decide to stay. And because they do that, they actually bring the good news to the captain or to the warden of that prison and to his family, and they're actually baptized. But that's a different situation. So the high priest then calls together the council and the whole body of elders. So now we're talking about the Sanhedrin. Okay, this is the same group that had tried James and Peter, or John and Peter, excuse me, when they healed the lame man. And this is also the group that had condemned Jesus and handed him over to Pontius Pilate. Okay, they are the head council of the Israelites. It includes the chief priest, but it also includes other Pharisees and other religious leaders and other elders of the people who have an important place in society, especially in Jerusalem. Okay. If you remember Nicodemus from the Gospel of John, Nicodemus is a member of the Sanhedrin. So too is the guy in John who takes Jesus down from the cross.
Joseph of Arimathea.
Yeah, Joseph of Arimathea. Bonnie has a better memory than I do. It's fading fast, y'all. Should probably see a doctor or something. In any case, so they gathered the Sanhedrin together, and they send for the temple police to go bring the 12 before them because they're going to put a stop to this, right? But when the prison guard or when the captain of the guard gets there, there's nobody there, and all the doors are locked, all the windows are secure, nobody knows how it happens, and they are just utterly confused. They become even more confused when they hear, oh, those people you arrested who were supposed to be in prison, yeah, they're back there in the porch and they're preaching again. So they send the captain of the guard out there to gather them up, but they don't like violently arrest them because the people are so enraptured by what they're hearing and by the things that the apostles are doing that they're afraid that if they go in there and just grab them with violence, that the people might actually attack them right there in the temple. Okay, so it's become a very public movement, and now it's the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the high priestly class that is having to be on the defensive and having to be careful, because if they're not, they can end up losing their power. They're afraid of the people at this point, which is a little crazy when you consider it's their own people. So you have to ask yourself, if you're the high priest and these people are causing so much of a disturbance to you, but not to the people are welcoming this message of grace and love and are welcoming these gifts from God, are you on the right side or are you on the wrong side? If you have to become afraid of the people, you're probably not on the right side of things, as any dictator in the world can tell you. Okay. Questions about that section before we get to the actual trial, which we're not going to get to tonight. Questions, comments? Confusion? Barbara, you good with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Judy, you good?
Yes, I'm sorry. That was Esther. I told her we were just finishing Bible study.
Okay.
Now, I should recruit her for Bible study, right?
Yes.
Yes, you should.
Well, I'll try.
Debbie, you're good?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Kathy, Elizabeth,
I'm good.
All right, so when we pick up next week, we will talk about the little trial they go through there. And some interesting things happen in that. So we will talk about that, and I will also get those answers about the community and also the weird little story about Ananias and Sapphira. Because I now have a stack of commentaries about yay tall on the Gospel of Acts, or the book of Acts. So I have plenty of resources to consult with from people who are far, far smarter than I will ever be. So if nobody has any other questions, comments, concerns, or smart remarks.
Give you a smart remark.
Okay.
I got a little booklet here. Acts, our cartoonist guide. A graphic novel by Stephen Thomason. And it is definitely cartoons.
Yep.
But it said the same thing you were saying.
Yep.
In sort of a cartoonish way.
Well, you know, people have looked down on graphic novels there for a long time, but they're actually really important. If you talk with teachers, you'll find out that, you know, usually graphic novels get introduced like 3rd or 4th grade. They'll tell you that kids who have been told they have problems reading in 1st and 2nd grade will pick up a graphic novel and fly through it like it's nothing, because they don't feel like they're reading a novel, but they actually are. And suddenly it helps them with their reading in lots of different ways. You know, Lexi has always been a good reader, but she can take a graphic novel like the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and she can fly through a 200-page book in a day. It's actually a little frustrating sometimes because I have to buy the books. You know, she'll get a new book and she'll be done with it before we get home. So, but I used to do the same thing when I was her age. So, you know, I'm glad there are graphic novels for the Bible books, because it really is a help to kids to help them understand things that, you know, you sit down as a 3rd grader to try to read the Bible, and you're as lost as you are if you're 50 and you're trying to read the Bible. You know, it's just a lot to take in all at once, because it doesn't take a breath, it just moves. So
I think when I was a kid, that they called them Classics Illustrated, and they were the same format as a normal comic book.
Yeah.
And we were highly discouraged to read one of those and try to do a book report on it.
yeah. So, all right. If there's nothing else, then I will see you all on Sunday. And then again on Wednesday for our next session.
If you don't take vacation.
Okay.
Night.
Thank
Y'all
you.
have a good night.
Have a good
Have a
week.
good night.
Good night,
You
Barbara.
too.
Good
Good
night,
night.
y'all.
Good night. Feel better, Barbara.
Everybody.
Thank you.